Hello! This is the beginning of a fun little project I'm starting titled Why They Hate the USA, going through why various countries dislike American foreign policy and government as a direct result of American actions in and around said countries. This hatred very rarely extends to regular American people, or likewise victims of the same oppressive structures in other ways, despite at times being beneficiaries of the carnage and interventions the US carries out globally. Today's country is Cuba, an island nation in the Caribbean with a population of roughly 11 million people. Following centuries of exploitation, enslavement, and genocide in the wake of Spanish conquest, the Spanish-American War took place, resulting in Cuba becoming a protectorate of the US. That's not to deny the many slave revolts and guerrilla movements the Cubans carried out, but I don't want this history lesson to drag on too long. Following the American victory, a new constitution was written under heavy US supervision, giving the US the exclusive right to intervene in Cuban affairs, to control financial matters and even foreign relations. US-owned companies began selling Cuban land to Americans. The US likewise quote-unquote leased the Guantanamo Bay naval base from Cuba, unsurprisingly with no say from the Cuban people. They're still there now, as unwelcome guests, of course. The Cuban government hasn't accepted payment for Guantanamo in over 60 years, and has repeatedly requested the Americans to stop violating Cuban sovereignty and leave. The Vietnamese example shows that the US doesn't leave anywhere they're not forced out of. Let's enumerate examples of American intervention throughout the early 20th century. After fairly contentious elections in the 1910s, where the US supervised the democratic and free ability to vote for only those that aren't black, aren't women, and have more than $250 to their name in the mostly peasant island. Tomás Estrada Palma, the first president of Cuba, had a revolt on his hands that he couldn't crush. The US got involved, occupying Cuba, and named Charles Edward Magoon, an American lawyer and diplomat, governor of Cuba for 3 years. Fiscal irresponsibility is an understatement when analyzing this time, introducing new levels of political corruption which made regular Cubans hate the guy, unsurprisingly. Throughout some stability in the 1920s, tourism of a particular type exploded with the arrival of fresh-eyed American men. Gambling and prostitution, established with American money and serving wealthy white American tourists, was allowed to develop underneath extensive crime organizations within the US. These organizations had contacts with the US government who turned a blind eye to it, and likewise essentially controlled Cuban commerce through bribes, racketeering, and violence. Visiting Havana without a visit to a brothel was considered a waste of a trip, and those forcibly prostituted were by majority African or mixed race in origin. The highest demographic, aside from wealthy tourists, were American military and naval personnel, who were known to be particularly violent and demanding when drunk. Which they were, often. After the victory of the revolution, an official census found 150,000 prostitutes on the island, which, following increased access to healthcare, education, rehabilitation, essentially eliminated the practice in Cuba. From the 30s onwards, Fulgencio Batista makes an appearance. Through juntas and other sneaky tactics, he emerged as the principal leader of Cuba until the revolution, in which he fled the island, emptying the nation's coffers and stealing upwards of $500 million worth of cash, art, and assets. Speaking of assets, Batista himself was a direct asset of the United States. Cuban agriculture was barred from development, instead it was used as a sugar subsidy for the world's largest economy, the United States. Batista himself facilitated the direct American ownership of the vast majority of arable land within Cuba, as well as the ownership of most businesses as well. The aforementioned mafia got their hands in there too, with not too uncertain support from US intelligence. Those same US intelligence members had stakes in many businesses within Cuba, as well as the rest of Latin America. Cuba was no more than an American military base populated by bars, casinos, brothels, and an illiterate peasant population under the thumb of a US-backed dictator. Incredibly romantic. With the fall of America's dictator within Cuba, a new era began. Literacy programs, the building up of industry, new trade agreements with the world, women's rights, successful attempts at correcting the horrific racial biases that existed on the island, and so much more were put into motion. At first, the revolutionary government was willing to cooperate with the US, but the US had other ideas. What the Cubans wanted would have directly affected the profits of those Americans that had presided over Cuban agriculture and industry, most of them, as previously mentioned, being intimately connected to American ruling structures as well. American-owned and ran companies within Cuba simply refused to work with the government of Cuba, refusing to refine oil, to pass paperwork, or to even listen to the requests of Cuban delegates. With American refusals to any progressive policies, the revolutionary government of Cuba nationalized industry and returned Cuban soil and Cuban assets into Cuban hands. The United States in turn responded by placing on Cuba some of the severest economic sanctions history has known, colloquially referred to as the Embargo. The motivations were simple. In a declassified file, they listed their motivations as clear as day. The majority of Cubans support Cuba. The lowest estimate I've seen is 50%. The only foreseeable means of alienating internal support is through disenchantment and disaffection based on economic dissatisfaction and hardship. Every possible means should be undertaken promptly to weaken the economic life of Cuba, The greatest inroads should be made in denying money and supplies to Cuba to decrease monetary and real wages to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of government. Back to the video in just a second. Let's hear from today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. For a lot of research that I do for my videos, I end up hitting pages that aren't available in my location. That's frustrating, as you can imagine. Geo-restriction really does suck, but not with Atlas VPN. For those unaware, a virtual private network makes all of your internet traffic travel through an encrypted tunnel. This way, it protects you from spying, public Wi-Fi dangers, and hides your IP address and your online activities. It even allows you to change your location for all your researching needs. Developed by top cybersecurity specialists and IT engineers in 2019, Atlas VPN was created to make the internet accessible and secure for everybody. Currently, it has more than 6 million users worldwide, and boasts the best VPN deal on the market, with the most affordable online protection plan for just under $2 per month, if you can believe it, with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So, what are you waiting for? Go down to the description and click that link and use my code Hakeem to get a 3-year subscription for just $183 a month, with 3 months free. But that's not all. You get blazing fast speeds for streaming or gaming, unlimited protection for all your devices, an inbuilt ad and malware blocker, and you'll get to save some extra cash as Atlas VPN will find you the best deal online from everything from your online subscriptions to airlines, hotels, and more. Right now, Atlas VPN is running a huge discount. It means you can get a 3-year subscription for just $183 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Time is running out, so get your deal by clicking the link in the video description below. Massive thanks to Atlas VPN for the sponsorship. This is what allows me to pay my editor fairly, so the support is highly appreciated. Alright, back to the video. This is an American policy that began in 1960 and hasn't yet ended even till today. But that wasn't enough. US President Eisenhower in 1960 alone gave the CIA $13.1 million to use against the new Cuban government. Accounting for inflation, that's $121 million in today's money, not for education or healthcare or jobs or infrastructure in the US, but to overthrow a people's government to secure further profits for a handful of people at the American top. Regardless, they couldn't just stop at this, so in 1961 the United States officially sponsored and supported a clandestine invasion of Cuba by a military force directly trained by them. This was known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. This American adventure failed spectacularly, embarrassing the US on the international stage and damaging Kennedy's reputation. Of course, the CIA got to work immediately planning another invasion in 1962, but that was quickly scrapped as Kennedy saw that another US failure would permanently ruin America's global standing. That definitely didn't stop them, though, from developing Operation Northwoods, a plan concocted by the US Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in which many possibilities for starting a war with Cuba based on false pretenses were discussed, outlined, and planned. These include assassinations of Cuban immigrants, sinking of boats, shooting down planes carrying civilians, and acts of terror within US cities. To quote, "We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area and in other Florida cities and even in Washington. The terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. We could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the United States, even to the extent of wounding in instances to be widely publicized. Exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of Cuban agents and the release of prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement also would be helpful in projecting the idea of an irresponsible government." These proposals were approved at every level of US government until it reached Kennedy, who was the final person to look it over and eventually reject the proposal. Not from some love for peace, mind you, but because he worried that the military forces that would be diverted to Cuba would be better used in Berlin or Vietnam. The proposal itself was presented in a document titled Justification for US Military Intervention in Cuba, which outlined the general invasion plan of Cuba by the US. Aggressive military posturing against Cuba intended to provoke a Cuban reaction. A series of well-coordinated false flag incidents planned to take place in and around Guantanamo to give a genuine appearance of it being done by hostile Cuban forces. United States response by executing offensive operations to secure water and power supplies, destroying artillery and mortar emplacements which threatened Guantanamo. These include the admitted civilian targets. Finally, commenced large-scale United States military operations in Cuba. Keep in mind, Guantanamo is Cuban soil illegally occupied by the US. Their general plan was to provoke an attack on a US military base that has no business being there in a sovereign and independent nation, and then to respond with overwhelming force against the nation, expanding the occupation from a naval base to the whole island. This also neatly ties into Operation Mongoose. Among the plans to kill American civilians in order to justify invasion of Cuba, the CIA also outlined many plans for the assassination of Fidel Castro and other leaders of the revolution. If you're interested in that history, episode 13 of our podcast DD program, titled Cucked by Fidel, very creatively, goes into the topic much deeper. Likewise, bonus episode 15 goes into each wacky assassination attempt bit by bit, so check out the exclusive section of the podcast for that. I promise you won't regret it. Almost every false flag operation planned had the expressed intention of justifying a war with Cuba, even for unrelated events. For example, Operation Dirty Trick had the expressed goal of blaming failed US space missions on Cuba. To quote, "The objective is to provide irrevocable proof that, should the Mercury-manned orbital flight fail, the fault lies with the communists et al. Cuba. This is to be accomplished by manufacturing various pieces of evidence which would prove electronic interference on the part of the Cubans." They even went as far as to plan false quote-unquote Cuban invasions of nearby countries which would give the US an excuse to intervene. Hilariously, there is an official, highly sanitized publication that details American interventions and war crimes called the National Security Archive, which basically cycles between "we didn't do it" and "if we did do it, then we were justified in doing it." Highlighted areas of action were, to quote, "anti-Castro propaganda, disruptions of the Cuban economy, including large-scale sabotage operations and the development of instructor cadres to provide both communications and paramilitary training to resistance groups." Under Mongoose, over a dozen major operations were authorized and carried out, including military attacks on sugar mills, railways, power plants, and oil refineries. One of the industrial facility attacks resulted in the deaths of 400 workers, with Kennedy's direct approval. According to the historian Stephen Rabe, the Kennedy administration showed no interest in Castro's repeated requests that the United States cease its campaign of sabotage and terrorism against Cuba. Kennedy did not pursue a dual-track policy towards Cuba. The United States would entertain only proposals of surrender. Rabe's research further shows how US-backed groups would stage hit-and-run attacks on Cuban ships transporting goods and on the island itself. Historian Jorge Dominguez further documents that only once in the 1,000 pages of documentation did a US official raise something that resembled a faint moral objection to US government-sponsored terrorism. According to Chomsky, in the end, the entire failed endeavor to oust the revolutionary government of Cuba cost upwards of several hundreds of millions of dollars, if not even billions. Again, not for healthcare or education of American citizens, but for the profits of a few casino moguls and US businessmen with lost stake in Cuban industry. This series of constant meddling and provocation by the US began in 1960 and has not ended since. Not only this, but this is only scratching the surface of US meddling in Cuban affairs. There's a lot more that is equally horrific and has been declassified, and God knows how much more remains classified. I won't touch too much on the Cuban Missile Crisis, which has been spun to such lengths that most people would be surprised to hear that there were first US nuclear weapons in Turkey aimed at the USSR, which the USSR then responded to by placing nuclear weapons in Cuba with Cuban consent. The USSR brought forward reasonable resolutions to the issue, such as, "hey, let's both withdraw our missiles," which the US refused till they reluctantly acquiesced only after being able to play the entire thing in their favor, media-wise. Much more importantly, let's not forget the embargo and its explicit purpose. If you bother reading the standard narrative from mostly Western press, you'd see very few, if any, mentions of the embargo. Of course, this is by design. If you're unaware, the US has economically blockaded the rogue state of Cuba since the early 60s, limiting inflow of basic goods either directly or indirectly. We're talking even basic medicines and food. They claim the embargo makes exceptions for this, but that's only for show. The wording is made so intentionally vague as to essentially disincentivize companies from even considering trade with Cuba. The total amount of wealth lost to the blockade accounts to nearly $1 trillion US. That's hundreds of billions for an island nation of only 11 million people. The way it happens is like this. Any ship that trades with Cuba can't enter US ports for 180 days. The US, being the world's largest economy, is effectively barring trade with Cuba for the rest of the world by preventing those countries from trading with itself. Any company that has any assets or trade with the US can be sanctioned and punished for quote-unquote breaking the embargo if they trade with Cuba. Not to spoil the ending, but practically every major company worldwide has some connection to the US. Even companies with no assets or links to the US are targeted with forceful seizure of their assets or outright banning of company members from entering the US. In essence, the embargo not only prevents goods from physically entering Cuba, but it also is made to be the maximum incentive not to trade with Cuba. Not to mention, this is internationally illegal. The UN voted on this numerous times, and every country on Earth, aside from the US and of course its puppet Israel, voted to lift the embargo. Now tell me, when literally every nation represented by the UN votes to do something, and only 2 countries decide, you know what, I'm not gonna do that, who's really the rogue state? The cherry on top is that, according to polling, the majority of Americans would also like to lift the embargo. Despite this clear expression of democratic majority, the US continues to violate that democratic will in order to, supposedly, bring democracy to Cuba. That doesn't end there though. The US continues to try to disrupt Cuban life, even during catastrophic times. After COVID, tourism took a big hit and the Cuban economy suffered. As a nation sanctioned for over half a century, the compounding effects of an international pandemic and subsequent recovery wouldn't be hard to imagine. The US itself is having a hard time, much less Cuba. Some small-scale demonstrations were held at the time. Unsurprisingly, there were efforts to turn this genuine grievance of the Cuban people into a political protest aimed at overthrowing the Cuban government by the US government and its lackeys, mainly through the media. The US government has very little power in Cuba itself otherwise. Whenever a particular product shortage exists in Cuba, the US capitalizes with intensifying sanctions, with sanctions on medical needles being the most unpleasant during the pandemic. Following this, prominent US politicians were calling for and continued to call for US military intervention into Cuba, along with calls for the assassination of Cuban officials. Twitter at the time was flooded with brand new accounts posting the same copy-pasted text at a rate of 5 per second, and despite the very underwhelming turnout of protesters in Cuba generally, American media tried to pass off images and videos of protests in other places, like Egypt or other Latin American countries, as Cuban protests. They even used footage of protests in Miami and passed them off as within Cuba. Not satisfied with this, they even took footage of pro-government demonstrations and labeled them anti-government protests. The UN Human Rights Council used an image of a pro-government demonstrator in a lukewarm statement about the protests, and when the woman herself responded by saying, "Down with the blockade, long live the revolution," Twitter restricted her account. The US hasn't stopped there though. Several attempts have been made to create a Cuban Twitter or a Cuban Facebook for organizing counter-revolutionary action and manipulating local opinion, attempts that have colossally failed. Other attempts include the US spending millions of dollars on expat Cuban rappers and other hip-hop artists in hopes of cultivating a cultural counter-revolution of sorts. The US government continues to spend tens of millions of dollars on quote-unquote democratic opposition groups, meaning groups subservient to US agendas intending to overthrow the current government for specifically US interests. Had the US truly been interested in democracy, they would have picked their allies much more wisely. If anything, this just reinforces another quote from the great helmsman: US imperialism is the most voracious enemy of the people of the entire world. The core of that enemy, however, is capitalism. Some book recommendations include Cuba and the US Empire, A Chronological History, which is an excellent and concise history of Cuba and American intervention, Voices from the Other Side, An Oral History of Terrorism Against Cuba, which documents US terror attacks, Cuba and Its Neighbors, Democracy in Motion, which details the Cuban democratic process, and finally, How the Workers' Parliament Saved the Cuban Revolution, Reviving Socialism After the Collapse of the Soviet Union. This book is the best in the list and is self-explanatory. That's all for this time. If you enjoy what I do, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help. I'd like to thank my patrons, so thank you to Nitro Dubs, Kenny, Thomas Roberts, Nicholas, Owen Baker, T. Wood, Dr. Lemonman, Lumix, Charlie and Eric, Ultimate Turin, Daniel Ethel, The Generic Guy, Santiago Pereira, Rain, Cassandra Corvus, David Fries, Confuse M, Mariana Mastusovic, Robbie Richardson, and Masay Kudrow. Thanks for watching.